So this slide, it's entitled Overview of Social Media Use. And the reason why we focus on social media is because it's so emblematic of the growth and the explosive growth of data within the internet. And it's often characterized as what's the current evolution of the internet, Web 2, right? If you've ever heard that term, Web 2.0. But look at these numbers in terms of the number of social media users. You're looking at 4.62 billion. By the way, Facebook or Meta has 3 billion of those users logging in. And that's their user base. In fact, every single day, they've got 2 billion users logging in and out of Facebook. And then another kind of metric to point out here is the average daily time spent on using social media in blue. So you look at the average there is 2 hours and 27 minutes. But that's the average globally. If you look at each geography individually, like South Korea, the users there are spending around 5 hours on average per person per day. So an enormous amount of time that's being dedicated to being online and all of the communication associated with that. And the reason why we mention that in the context of our webinar today is that a lot of the relevant custodians will have some portion of potential communication, whether it's business or related to your matter otherwise within the social media realm, because social media does have chat functions and file sharing functions. A lot of these platforms do inherit or enable that type of interaction with other relevant custodians and witnesses.
Yeah, I think, I think these graphics are so interesting because I think they're, as you mentioned, they're so representative of what we're dealing with now. It used to just be emails. That was all we had to think about. And now, just within the category of social media, we have all these different ones that we have to think about. And then we have to look at collaboration tools, and there's, a variety of collaboration tools. And then we have to think about communication that's not social media based and what those look like. And I think, I didn't say this at the outset, but I always try to come from a practitioner perspective, because that's what I am. I'm a practitioner. So I try to think about what do I need to be doing as a practitioner to deal with all of this? And, this can be overwhelming when you look at these graphs and you look at these numbers and you think, oh my God, where do I start? What am I supposed to be doing with all of this? And I think the answer to that is really very early on in the case. It's so important to sit down with the IT department of your client or with individual users and learn what apps are they using, how are they using them, what type of data and communications are channeling through each of those different types of platforms, because you can't make informed decisions about how to proceed, and you can't have informed negotiations with opposing counsel without having all of this knowledge. And so I just think it's so important, it's overwhelming at the beginning, but I think it's so important to just sit down with people and say, how do you communicate with your coworkers? What devices are you using? What applications are you using? One of the things obviously that we're facing, and some of the other panelists I know can talk about this, one of the things that we face that's an issue too is the commingling of data between personal and business, right? So a lot of people use their cell phones for work purposes as well. And so now we're not only dealing with, okay, what apps are you using? We're dealing with what apps are you using, and are you using them for both personal and business purposes? Because now you've got, even more factors to be considering. So that's all I would really say at this outset is it's really overwhelming, but the key and the most important thing is to sit down and have conversations with people so you can figure out how expansive you need to be, or more importantly, how narrow you can be, in what you're targeting and collecting and reviewing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jerry was referencing this graphic as well of just, what Meta has as far as control over, these chat applications. But Aaron, would like to hear from you, your thoughts on both the previous graphic and this, and just how, these apps are impacting forensics and review and discovery.
Yeah, so I think on the previous slide, the thing that still to me is the most striking is just the idea of that number of total social media users versus total internet users. And I don't know why that still surprises me, but it does. That's a really high percentage of, if you're on the internet, more likely than not, you're on social media. And so I think that that's one that legal teams in particular need to keep in mind. I do think that we have seen progressively more and more legal teams start to really dig into social media. But I still think that there's a lot of teams out there that don't necessarily consider that as kind of a first option of, hey, you know, it really can be your greatest source for background information to a lot of things, especially based on those numbers of the idea of, you know, almost 94% of people out there are social media users in general, just versus those who use the internet. So it's pretty crazy to me. But on the next slide, you know, this really kind of does tie into that previous slide in the sense of this is based on Android devices and the messaging apps that are used on those Androids by location. You know, I think that for most of us, it's really no surprise that Facebook is kind of the dominant for North America in general, especially the US and Canada. But you know, what's intriguing is to see how big really WhatsApp is. And when you look at kind of the combination of those two together, the percentage of the world that that are on those apps. Now, it is important also to remember, I guess, if you're looking at this from the idea of kind of what do I need to collect, that these are the dominant apps. There are certainly going to be other apps that need to be looked at. In particular, things that I would note is like we commonly see WhatsApp when we're doing collections now here. So it's not kind of an either or type of scenario. It's simply this is kind of what the dominant app looks like. But you should always be on the lookout for all of these in addition to others. You know, it's every other month something new is popping up. And so you really have to kind of be on top of things as far as what messaging apps exist and where that information might be.
Yeah, that's great, Aaron. And then Melissa, when you're in your practice, when you're looking at identifying forms of communications and even other potentially data types, what are you seeing and how you're going about working with your clients and identifying those types of data that could be necessary?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, these days we are, and lawyers are slow on the uptake, we know this. We are still seeing mostly email evidence in our cases. And I'll be honest, that is very often our preference. We have an easier time working with email evidence. This is, though, simply not going to fly all that much longer. It's not how the business people at our clients are communicating with each other. A lot of them are barely using email at all. And so sort of getting away with limiting documentary evidence to email or maybe emails and some text messages. I think that that's likely going to be pretty quickly changing. And more and more, I'm having to get my arms around data types that I'm frankly unfamiliar with. And so, you know, we can try our best to limit the scope of discovery, but if during initial custodial interviews, we learn that our clients are using other ways of communicating, that's where the evidence is. And, you know, we're gonna have to go there.
So another, I think, takeaway from this slide is look at the area in purple. It's, you know, WeChat, and you don't see purple much anywhere else, but WeChat is really commonly used in China there, what's represented on the map in purple for normal everyday business communication, right? It's not a third-party chat app that's considered part of shadow IT that users are spinning up on their own. It's really a sanctioned app, sanctioned in the definition of being approved or a de facto mode of communication for personal and business. So if you're like a salesperson that's doing business development in China, it's almost required that you install WeChat on your phone in order to conduct business. So it's helpful to look at this map when conducting interviews to get a sense ahead of time of where your custodians live, what's the most commonly used chat app in that geography and ask whether or not that's something that they use for relevant communication.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what you just said, Jerry, and what Melissa was saying earlier, it's true that lawyers are really behind the times, generally speaking. And a lot of times, when I'm joining a case team or something, and I'll ask, what about cell phones, or what about social media or whatever, and I always just get the, oh no, we're not doing that. And it's like, okay, but did you ask? And so you kind of have to start doing the asking to figure out what we actually need to do. And, I heard somebody at a panel that I was attending earlier this year say that within the next 5 years, the shift will be to 80% of data will be structured data. And I think a lot of statistics are sort of made up on the spot, but I think the sentiment was correct. Whether that statistic is correct or not, I have no idea. But I think the sentiment is correct that we are moving from email, not just to collaboration tools, but to structured data. And that's a whole other world. And lawyers are like not ready for that, I don't think, but we have to be ready for it. And so, I have a tendency to do a lot of DOJ cases and a lot of patent cases and intellectual property cases, which are totally unrelated types of law. And in intellectual property cases, there's email is usually not a thing, but structured data absolutely is a thing. And, I don't really know anything about JIRA and Confluence databases, but I have to have experts around me who can tell me how those function and what the data output looks like and what kind of reports can be run and how you can sort of capture the data that you want. And I think that's really important, to Melissa's point and to Jerry's points. There are experts out there on data types, and I'm not going to be that person all the time, but I have to, have access to those people and to sit down and ask questions and figure out, what the best way is to attack certain types of data.